Hey there. Tonight, we're stepping into a world that looks nothing like the polished portraits and elegant novels suggest. Not the romanticized Victorian drawing rooms with their pristine ladies and gentlemen, but the actual lived reality of keeping clean in an era that was, to put it mildly, still figuring things out. You won't find perfect complexions here or spotless homes. Just the honest, often uncomfortable truth about soap, sweat, chamber pots, and the slow crawl toward what we might recognize as modern hygiene. If these calm tales from the past help you drift into dreams, you can like and subscribe, but only if they truly calm your mind. And if you'd like to help our peaceful historical channel grow, your support means more than you imagine. Tell me in the comments where you're listening from, the time on your clock, and if you still have a little sleepy hype remaining, send it our way. It's oddly comforting to know who else is drifting off to the same slow march through history. So, dim the lights. Let the gaslight flicker in your imagination. Settle in, and let's begin with the morning routine of a Victorian life. You wake in a Victorian bedroom, and the first thing you notice is the cold. Not the bracing chill of winter camping or the pleasant coolness of air conditioning, but the bone-deep cold of a room that has no central heating, no insulation worth mentioning, and windows that let in drafts through every crack and crevice. The fire in your bedroom hearth, if you're wealthy enough to have one, died hours ago. The embers are gray ash now. Your breath fogs in the morning air as you sit up in bed, and already you're making calculations about how long you can delay leaving the relative warmth of your blankets. The year might be 1850, or 1870, or 1890. The specifics shift across Queen Victoria's 63-year reign, but the morning routine remains remarkably consistent. The room around you tells a story of class and circumstance. If you're among the wealthy, the walls might be papered in elaborate patterns, greens and golds, achieved with dyes that contain arsenic, slowly poisoning the air you breathe each night. The floor might be carpeted, thick wool that traps dust and odors and never truly gets clean. Heavy curtains block the light and the drafts, but they also harbor moths and mildew. If you're working class, the room is simpler. Bare floorboards, thin curtains if any, walls that might be whitewashed or simply exposed brick. Either way, the cold penetrates everything. Your bed is a wooden frame, possibly with a headboard carved with flowers or geometric patterns if you're fortunate. The mattress is stuffed with straw if you're poor, horsehair if you're better off, and it's lumpy in places, compressed in others from years of use. You sleep on sheets made of linen or cotton, and they're washed, but not frequently. Once a month is common for the middle classes, less often for the poor, who might not have spare linens to rotate while the others are being laundered. The wealthy might change their sheets weekly, a task that requires servants to haul the linens away, boil them in massive copper pots, scrub them, rinse them, wring them out, and hang them to dry with heavy irons heated on the stove. The bedding itself is heavy. Wool blankets, quilts stuffed with down if you can afford it, or cotton batting if you cannot. In winter, you might sleep under 5 or 6 layers, and still you wake with your nose cold and your joints stiff. In summer, you swelter under the weight, but you can't simply sleep uncovered because propriety demands modesty. And besides, the blankets keep the bedbugs at bay, at least a little. Bedbugs are a constant companion in Victorian England. They live in the mattresses, in the wooden joints of the bed frame, in the cracks in the walls. At night, they emerge to feed, leaving itchy welts across your skin. You've learned to ignore the bites, to scratch absently while you dress, to check your sheets for the smears of blood left behind when you roll over and crush one in your sleep. Across the room stands the washstand, the central fixture of Victorian personal hygiene. It's a piece of furniture you interact with every morning and every evening, a ritual so ingrained you could perform it with your eyes closed. The washstand is typically made of wood, oak or mahogany for the wealthy, pine for everyone else, and it holds a ceramic bowl and pitcher set. These matching pieces are often decorated with floral patterns or simple bands of color, blue or green or burgundy. The bowl sits in a circular opening cut into the top of the washstand, and the pitcher rests beside it or on a lower shelf. Below, there's usually a cupboard where you keep towels, soap, and other necessities. The pitcher was filled last night, probably by a servant if you're middle class or above, or by yourself if you're not. The water came from a well, a public pump, or if you're very fortunate and live in a city late in the Victorian period, from a tap connected to the municipal water supply. But even city water is suspect. It's often discolored, sometimes smelling of chemicals or worse, and you've learned not to look too closely at what might be floating in it. You pour the water into the bowl, and the sound echoes in the quiet morning, a cascade that seems too loud in the stillness. The water is cold, shockingly so in winter, merely cool in summer. There is no mixing of hot and cold water to achieve a comfortable temperature. Hot water exists, certainly, but obtaining it requires effort. To get hot water, someone must light a fire, fill a kettle or pot, wait for the water to heat, and then carry it upstairs without spilling or scalding themselves. This is a task for servants in wealthy households, and they do it before the family wakes, filling cans of hot water that wait, gradually cooling, in the bedrooms. For the working class, hot water is a rare luxury, reserved for weekly baths or illness. On an ordinary morning, you make do with cold. You splash your face, gasping slightly at the shock of it. Your skin protests, prickling and tingling, but you continue. You cup water in your hands and bring it to your cheeks, your forehead, behind your ears, down your neck. You're washing the visible parts, the parts that society will see. Your hands get special attention, scrubbed front and back, between the fingers, under the nails if you can manage it. The dirt under your nails is stubborn, worked in from yesterday's activities, whatever they might have been. If you're a clerk, it's ink. If you're a tradesman, it's grime from your work. If you're a woman managing a household, it's everything from coal dust to food stains. Soap makes an appearance now, assuming you have it. Victorian soap is not the fragrant lathering luxury we know today. It's often harsh, made from animal fats, tallow from beef or mutton, combined with lye in a process that yields a hard, alkaline bar that strips oil from your skin along with the dirt. The soap might be yellow or brown, rarely white, and it smells of the fats it's made from, a scent that's not unpleasant but not particularly appealing either. Cheaper soap sometimes contains sand or pumice to aid in scrubbing, which works well for very dirty hands but leaves your skin raw if you use it on your face. By the 1880s and 1890s, commercial soap manufacturing has become sophisticated. Companies like Pears have been producing soap for decades, and they've turned it into an art form. Pears soap is transparent, achieved through a process of dissolving the soap in alcohol and then allowing it to settle, producing a clear amber bar that's gentle on the skin. It's also expensive, marketed to the middle and upper classes as a mark of refinement. The company's advertisements are everywhere, featuring testimonials from celebrities and reassuring customers that Pears soap keeps the pores open and the complexion clear, two things Victorians are deeply concerned about. The obsession with open pores comes from a misunderstanding of how the body works. Victorians believed that the body expels toxins and bad vapors through the skin, particularly through the pores, and that anything which blocks this process can lead to illness. This is why they're wary of heavy cosmetics and why cleanliness becomes associated with health. Washing isn't just about removing dirt. It's about allowing the body to breathe, to release what needs to be released. It's a theory that has some truth to it, even if the reasoning is flawed. You dry your face and hands with a towel, probably a square of linen that's rough from being air-dried on a line without the benefit of fabric softener, which doesn't exist yet. The towel is used multiple times before it's washed, absorbing your moisture each morning, growing gradually stiffer and less absorbent until laundry day arrives. You hang it back on its hook or fold it and place it in the washstand cupboard. And now you're ready to address the next task, which is your hair. Victorian hairstyles for both men and women are elaborate affairs that require time, patience, and products. Women, in particular, face a daily challenge. Their hair is considered their crowning glory. The longer and more lustrous, the better. And it's displayed in intricate arrangements of curls, braids, and knots that can take an hour or more to create. But here's the thing. These styles are not dismantled each night and rebuilt each morning. That would be madness. Instead, a Victorian woman builds her hairstyle and then maintains it for days, sometimes weeks, sleeping carefully to preserve it, touching it up as needed, and washing it as infrequently as possible. The reason for this infrequency is practical. Washing long hair in the Victorian era is a production. There's no shampoo, at least not in the modern sense. The word shampoo exists, borrowed from the Hindi word champo, meaning to massage, and it refers to a scalp massage that sometimes involves soap. But commercial shampoo in a bottle doesn't become widely available until the very end of the Victorian period. Before that, women wash their hair with whatever they can find. Soap, which is harsh and difficult to rinse out completely, leaving the hair dull and sticky. Eggs beaten with water, which work surprisingly well, but require thorough rinsing in cold water to avoid cooking the egg in your hair. Or vinegar diluted with water, which helps remove oil and add shine, but leaves you smelling like a salad. The process goes like this. You heat water, A lot of it, because rinsing is crucial and requires multiple pours. You bend over a basin or tub, pour water over your head, work in your cleaning agent of choice, scrub your scalp with your fingertips, and then rinse, rinse, rinse. Your hair, when wet, becomes impossibly heavy, a thick rope of dripping strands that pulls at your scalp and soaks whatever you're wearing. You wrap it in a towel, but the towel is quickly saturated, so you need another and another. And then comes the drying, which, in a world without hair dryers, means sitting near a fire, if you can, or simply waiting, sometimes for an entire day, while your hair dries naturally in the cold, drafty house. Given all this effort, it's no wonder that Victorian beauty manuals suggest washing hair once a month for those with normal hair, every 2 weeks for those with particularly oily hair. Between washings, women brush their hair religiously, often 100 strokes a night, using brushes made from boar bristle that help distribute the natural oils from scalp to ends. They might apply pomades or oils, Macassar oil being particularly popular, which is made from coconut oil, palm oil, and ylang-ylang flowers. It makes the hair glossy, but also stains fabric, which is why anti-macassars, those small doilies you see draped over the backs of Victorian chairs and sofas, become necessary. They're literally there to protect the furniture from Macassar oil. Men have their own hair concerns. Beards and mustaches are fashionable for much of Victoria's reign, and they require grooming. A gentleman might use special waxes to twist the ends of his mustache into points, or beard oils to keep his whiskers soft and shaped. Barbers offer trimming services, and they also sell pomades and tonics, guaranteed to promote growth, prevent baldness, and maintain color. Many of these tonics are fraudulent, containing little more than alcohol and perfume. But hope springs eternal, and balding men are willing to try anything. The hair dye industry is robust and dangerous. Gray hair is associated with age and decline, so people, both men and women, seek to cover it. The dyes available are often based on metallic salts. Lead acetate is common, producing a dark color, but also leading to lead poisoning with prolonged use. Silver nitrate is another option, though it can turn hair strange shades of purple or green if not applied correctly. These dyes don't just coat the hair, they're absorbed through the scalp, entering the bloodstream and accumulating in the body. Over time, users might experience symptoms of metal poisoning, tremors, digestive problems, confusion, weakness. But vanity outweighs caution, and the dyes continue to sell. Returning to your morning routine, your hair is now addressed as much as it's going to be. If you're a woman, you've pinned it up, perhaps adding a few fresh curls around your face if you have time. If you're a man, you've combed it back, or parted it, or arranged your beard to satisfaction. The next concern is teeth, and this is where Victorian hygiene becomes truly problematic. Toothbrushes exist, but they're not universal. The first mass-produced toothbrushes start appearing in the late 1700s and early 1800s, made with handles of bone or ivory and bristles from boar hair. These are expensive items, carefully maintained and used for years. The bristles are stiff, sometimes uncomfortably so, and they don't penetrate between the teeth effectively. They're also prone to holding bacteria, as no one understands the concept of sanitizing them, and they're often shared among family members, passing infections from person to person. For those who can't afford a toothbrush or choose not to use one, tooth cleaning is accomplished with a cloth. You take a square of linen, wrap it around your finger, dip it in water or tooth powder, and scrub your teeth as best you can. It's not particularly effective, but it's better than nothing. Tooth powder is the precursor to toothpaste, a gritty substance made from a variety of ingredients, some helpful, some harmful. Common components include chalk or crushed cuttlebone for abrasiveness, charcoal for whitening, salt for its antibacterial properties, and flavorings like peppermint or clove to freshen the breath. Some tooth powders contain more exotic and dangerous ingredients. Brick dust is sometimes used for its abrasive quality, but it's too harsh and wears down the enamel. Sugar is occasionally added for flavor, which is counterproductive given that sugar feeds the bacteria that cause decay. And in some preparations, you find acids like sulfuric acid, added in small amounts to dissolve stains, but also dissolving the teeth over time. The results of Victorian dental care, or lack thereof, are visible in the mouths of the population. Tooth decay is rampant. By middle age, many people have lost several teeth. By old age, it's common to be entirely toothless. The causes are multiple. Diets high in sugar and refined flour, which have become more affordable and therefore more common, lack of effective cleaning methods, and a fundamental misunderstanding of what causes decay. When a tooth does go bad, the pain is intense. Abscesses form, pockets of infection at the root of the tooth that throb with every heartbeat and radiate agony through the jaw and into the skull. There are no antibiotics to fight the infection, no root canals to save the tooth. The only solution is extraction. And this is where Victorian dentistry reveals itself to be a nightmare. In the early part of the Victorian era, dentistry is not a recognized profession. Tooth pulling is performed by barbers who also cut hair and perform minor surgeries, by blacksmiths who have strong hands and pliers, and by traveling tooth drawers who set up at fairs and markets, promising painless extractions while a band plays loudly to drown out the screams. These practitioners have no formal training. They learn by doing, and they do a lot of damage. The procedure is straightforward and brutal. You sit in a chair, or sometimes you're held down by assistants. The tooth drawer selects a tool, a pair of pliers or specialized forceps called a pelican, named for its resemblance to a pelican's beak. He grips your tooth, braces himself, and pulls. If you're lucky, the tooth comes out cleanly. If you're not, it breaks, leaving roots embedded in your gum that will fester and cause further problems. Sometimes the wrong tooth is pulled. Sometimes adjacent teeth are loosened or damaged by the force. And through it all, you're awake and aware, experiencing every sensation because there is no anesthetic. That changes in the 1840s with the introduction of ether, and in the 1840s and 1850s with chloroform. These substances can render you unconscious, or at least dull the pain to a manageable level, and they revolutionize not just dentistry, but all of surgery. Ether is first used for tooth extraction in 1846, and the practice spreads rapidly. Chloroform becomes the preferred agent for many dentists because it acts faster and smells less offensive than ether, though it's also more dangerous, with a narrow margin between an effective dose and a lethal one. By the latter part of Victoria's reign, dentistry is becoming a legitimate profession. Dental schools are established, standards are set, and dentists begin to offer services beyond extractions. They can fill cavities with gold or amalgam, a mixture of mercury and other metals that's still in use today. They can fit dentures, false teeth made from materials that range from the grotesque to the ingenious. Early dentures are crafted from ivory, carved to resemble teeth and fitted to a base that might be made of ivory, bone, or precious metals. But ivory yellows and wears down quickly, and it absorbs odors from food and from the mouth itself, becoming foul over time. A more disturbing source of teeth for dentures is human cadavers. Teeth are pulled from the dead. Soldiers fallen on battlefields being a particularly abundant source after conflicts like the Napoleonic Wars, giving rise to the term Waterloo teeth. These real human teeth are set into dentures and sold to the living, who wear them without fully considering where they came from. Another source is the desperately poor. In both England and Ireland, poverty drives people to sell their teeth while still alive. A person might go to a dentist and sell their front teeth for a few shillings, enduring the pain of extraction in exchange for money they need to survive. Those teeth are then used in dentures for the wealthy. It's a grim transaction, one that highlights the vast inequality of the era. By the 1850s, vulcanite, a hardened rubber, becomes available as a base material for dentures, and it's cheaper and more comfortable than previous options. Porcelain teeth improve in quality, looking more natural and resisting stains better than ivory. But dentures are still uncomfortable. They don't fit snugly. They slip when you talk or eat, and they require adhesives or suction to stay in place. Many people simply remove them except when in public, enduring the embarrassment of a toothless mouth in private to avoid the discomfort of wearing them constantly. Back to your morning, you've now washed, dressed your hair, and done what you can for your teeth. The next task is clothing, and this is a complex layering process that differs dramatically between the sexes and across the social classes, but it's always time-consuming and restrictive. For a woman, dressing begins with the chemise, also called a shift. This is a loose, knee-length or ankle-length garment made of linen or cotton. It's the only thing you wear directly against your skin, and its purpose is to absorb sweat and protect your outer clothing from body oils. The chemise has short sleeves, or sometimes long ones, and it's usually white or cream-colored. It's washed regularly as you can manage, because it bears the brunt of your body's exertions. Over the chemise comes the corset, and this is where Victorian clothing becomes painful. The corset is a structured garment designed to shape the torso into the fashionable silhouette of the era. Early Victorian corsets emphasize a tiny waist and a smooth, conical shape. Later in the period, the S-bend corset comes into fashion, pushing the bust forward and the hips back, creating a posture that's elegant in photographs, but hell on the spine. Corsets are made from heavy cotton or coutil, a tightly woven fabric that doesn't stretch. They're reinforced with boning, strips of whalebone or steel that run vertically to keep the corset rigid. The front of the corset typically has a metal busk that fastens with hooks or studs, and the back laces up with a long cord that you pull tight and tie off. If you're wealthy, a lady's maid laces you in, pulling with practiced strength to achieve the desired tightness. If you're not wealthy, you might lace yourself, using a bedpost or hook on the wall for leverage, or you ask a sister or mother to help. The tightness of the corset is a matter of some debate, then and now. Reformers and doctors warn that tight lacing can deform the ribs, compress the internal organs, cause fainting and breathing difficulties, and lead to a host of other problems. And they're not wrong. There are women who lace so tightly that their ribs actually bend inward, creating a waist measurement of 18 or 16 inches or even less. There are women who faint regularly from restricted breathing. There are documented cases of corsets causing liver damage, digestive issues, and, during pregnancy, miscarriage. But not all women tight lace. Many wear their corsets laced loosely enough to allow comfortable breathing and movement. The corset for them is less a torture device and more a support garment, like a modern bra combined with back support. It holds the breasts, which otherwise have no separate support in the Victorian era, supports the back, and provides a smooth base for the outer clothing. Without it, the heavy fabrics of Victorian dresses would hang badly, and the silhouette would be lost. Regardless of how tightly it's laced, the corset is hot. It traps heat against your torso, and in summer you sweat profusely beneath it. The corset itself can't be washed easily. It would lose its shape, and the boning would rust. So it absorbs your sweat day after day, developing an odor that you try to mask with sachets of lavender or rose petals tucked into your clothing. Every so often, you might air it out, hanging it near an open window or in the sun, hoping the fresh air will dissipate the smell. It never fully does. Over the corset, you layer on petticoats. These are skirts made of cotton or linen, sometimes with flounces or ruffles to add volume, and you wear several of them. In the 1850s and 1860s, when skirts are at their widest, you might wear a crinoline instead, a cage-like structure made of steel hoops suspended by fabric tapes. The crinoline holds your skirts out in a bell shape, creating the iconic Victorian silhouette, but it's also cumbersome. It catches on door frames and furniture. It can tip forward or backward in the wind, revealing your legs, a scandal, and it's a significant fire hazard. Women wearing crinolines have died after their skirts brushed against an open flame and ignited, the fire racing up the fabric faster than they could remove the garment. By the 1870s, the crinoline gives way to the bustle, a framework worn at the back to create an exaggerated rear silhouette. The bustle is smaller and less dangerous than the crinoline, but it's still awkward, making sitting down a challenge as you have to perch on the edge of the chair to avoid crushing the bustle's structure. Finally, over all these layers comes the dress itself. Victorian dresses are complex constructions, often made in two pieces, a bodice and a skirt. The bodice fits tightly over the corset, buttoning up the front or back with sleeves that are long and close-fitting. The neckline is high during the day, covering the collarbone and throat because exposed skin is improper. The skirt attaches to the bodice at the waist, and it's voluminous, requiring yards and yards of fabric. The dress might be made of cotton for everyday wear, wool for warmth, or silk for special occasions. It's trimmed with ribbons, lace, embroidery, whatever decoration is fashionable and affordable. And here's the critical thing. This dress, this elaborate, multi-layered, expensive garment, is almost never washed. Water would shrink the fabric, ruin the shape, fade or run the dyes, dissolve the sizing that gives the fabric its crispness. So the dress is worn repeatedly, brushed to remove surface dirt, aired out to reduce odors, and spot cleaned when necessary with a damp cloth or solutions to remove specific stains. Grease spots might be treated with chalk dust or fuller's earth to absorb the oil. Mud is allowed to dry and then brushed off. Perspiration stains, particularly under the arms, are tolerated or hidden with clever folding and pinning of the fabric. Men's clothing is similarly layered, but less restrictive. A man starts with a shirt, usually white linen or cotton, with a front that might be plain or pleated, and a collar that's either attached or separate. Separate collars are popular because they're easier to launder, and a crisp white collar is a mark of respectability. The collar is stiff, starched, to the point where it can chafe the neck, leaving red marks and sometimes sores. Over the shirt, a man wears a waistcoat, a sleeveless garment that buttons up the front, often made of wool or a fancy fabric like silk or brocade for evening wear. The waistcoat has pockets, essential for holding a pocket watch, coins, and other small items, because men's trousers don't have the generous pockets we're used to today. The jacket comes next, a structured coat that fits closely through the shoulders and chest, and it's made of wool in dark colors: black, navy, dark brown. The jacket is heavy, adding to the layers of warmth that can be suffocating in summer. Trousers are also wool, held up with suspenders, not belts, and they're designed to be worn without creasing. They're pressed with a hot iron to maintain sharp lines, and they're brushed and spot cleaned like the jacket. Around the neck, a man wears a cravat or necktie, a piece of fabric tied in various fashions, depending on the era and the occasion. Early Victorian men favor elaborate cravats that require time and skill to tie correctly, creating a focal point of the outfit. Later, simpler neckties become more common, but they're still worn tight, constricting the throat and restricting blood flow, which probably contributes to the frequency of fainting among Victorian gentlemen, though that's less discussed than the fainting of corset women. All this clothing, for both men and women, serves multiple purposes beyond modesty and fashion. It's insulation against the cold, certainly, but it's also armor against the dirt and disease of the outside world. Victorian cities are filthy, streets coated in mud and manure, air thick with coal smoke and industrial emissions, and the layers of fabric provide a barrier, however imperfect, between your skin and all that filth. Once dressed, you're ready to venture out of the bedroom and into the rest of the house, which presents its own set of hygiene challenges. The Victorian home, regardless of class, is a battleground in the fight against dirt, and it's a fight that can never truly be won, only endlessly waged. In a middle-class or upper-class home, the morning begins with servants rising before the family to lay fires in the hearths, heat water, prepare breakfast, and generally ensure that the household is ready for the day. These servants, often young women from rural areas or impoverished urban families, sleep in the attic or basement in tiny, cold rooms, sharing beds and chamber pots, and their hygiene is a matter of economic efficiency rather than personal comfort. They're expected to be clean enough not to offend the family they serve, which means their visible parts, face and hands, must be scrubbed, and their uniforms must be neat. But baths are rare, privacy is non-existent, and their working conditions expose them to constant dirt. The maid who cleans the fireplaces, for instance, starts her day emptying ash from the grates, a dusty, filthy job that leaves her coated in soot. She scrubs her hands and face afterward, but there's no time for a full wash, and the ash works its way into her skin, under her nails, into her hair. The scullery maid who washes dishes stands for hours in hot water and harsh soap that cracks her hands and strips the skin until her fingers bleed. The cook works in a hot kitchen, sweating over stoves and ovens, her face flushed and damp, her clothing absorbing the smells of food and smoke. For the working class living in their own homes, the morning routine is dictated by work schedules. A factory worker, for instance, might wake at 5 in the morning to be at the mill by 6. There's no time for elaborate washing, just a quick splash of cold water, a crust of bread for breakfast, and out the door. A washerwoman, whose job is literally to clean other people's laundry, might spend her day bent over tubs of scalding water, her hands raw from lye soap, and yet she has little opportunity to clean her own clothing or person. A crossing sweeper, one of the lowestly occupations, stands at street corners sweeping horse manure and mud out of the way so that pedestrians can cross without soiling their shoes. And he's covered in filth from dawn to dusk, with nowhere to wash and no expectation that he should. The public perception of cleanliness is deeply tied to class. The wealthy and middle class view themselves as inherently cleaner, more respectable, more moral than the working poor. This isn't entirely without basis. They do have better access to soap, water, clean clothing, and the leisure time to maintain themselves. But the moral judgment is excessive and cruel. The poor are often described in the press and in literature as dirty, smelly, degenerate, as if their poverty is a result of their uncleanliness rather than the other way around. This attitude influences public health policy, or the lack thereof, in the early Victorian period. The slums of London, Manchester, Liverpool, and other industrial cities are overcrowded nightmares where entire families live in single rooms with no ventilation, no sanitation, and no clean water. Buildings are shoddily constructed. Landlords extract maximum rent while providing minimum maintenance, and the residents have no legal recourse. Diseases flourish in these conditions: tuberculosis, typhus, typhoid, scarlet fever, measles, cholera. Children die in alarming numbers, and adults don't fare much better. And yet, for decades, the government and the upper classes largely ignore these conditions, or they blame the victims. The theory of miasma, the belief that disease is caused by bad air, leads to some efforts to improve ventilation and reduce odors, but it doesn't address the fundamental problems of contaminated water and lack of sewage systems. It's not until reformers and journalists begin documenting the living conditions of the poor, publishing reports and statistics that shock the public conscience, that meaningful change begins to occur. One of the most influential of these reformers is Edwin Chadwick, a lawyer and social activist who, in 1842, publishes a report titled "The Sanitary Condition of the Laboring Population of Great Britain." The report is meticulously researched, filled with data on mortality rates, living conditions, and the economic costs of disease. Chadwick argues that improving sanitation will not only reduce suffering, but also save money by creating a healthier, more productive workforce. His report leads to the Public Health Act of 1848, which establishes a General Board of Health and gives local authorities the power to create boards of health to oversee sanitation, water supply, and disease prevention. The implementation of this act is slow and uneven. Local authorities resist. Property owners object to the costs of improvements, and the concept of government intervention in public health is controversial. But the act is a starting point, and over the following decades, more legislation is passed, more infrastructure is built, and gradually, conditions improve. Central to these improvements is the provision of clean water. In the early Victorian period, most Londoners get their water from the Thames or from shallow wells that are often contaminated by nearby cesspits. The water companies that supply the city draw their water directly from the river, often downstream from where sewage is being dumped into it. They filter it, sort of, using sand filters that remove some sediment but do nothing for bacteria or chemical pollutants. The water that comes out of the tap, if you're lucky enough to have a tap, is cloudy, foul-smelling, and teeming with microorganisms. The connection between water and disease is not initially understood. The prevailing theory of miasma holds that disease is transmitted through foul air, so efforts focus on improving ventilation and reducing smells. It's a physician named John Snow who challenges this theory. In 1854, during a cholera outbreak in the Soho district of London, Snow conducts a groundbreaking investigation. He maps the cases of cholera and notices that they cluster around a public water pump on Broad Street. He interviews families, traces the water supply, and becomes convinced that the water from this pump is the source of the outbreak. Snow removes the handle from the Broad Street pump, and the outbreak subsides. It's a dramatic demonstration of his theory, but it's not immediately accepted. The medical establishment is skeptical, and the miasma theory is deeply entrenched. It's not until the 1860s and 1870s, when Louis Pasteur and Robert Koch developed germ theory, proving that microorganisms cause disease, that Snow's waterborne theory gains widespread acceptance. In the meantime, the Thames continues to be both London's water source and its sewer, and the conditions worsen as the population grows. By the 1850s, the river is a vile, stinking cesspool, and the smell alone is enough to make people ill. Efforts to mask the smell include burning tar and lime along the riverbanks, dousing curtains and handkerchiefs in scented oils, and simply staying indoors as much as possible. But these measures are palliative at best. The crisis reaches its peak in the summer of 1858, a summer that's remembered as the Great Stink. The weather that year is exceptionally hot, with temperatures in London reaching 34 to 36 degrees Celsius in the shade and soaring to 48 degrees in direct sunlight. The heat is relentless, day after day, and the Thames, already low from a lack of rain, drops even further. The sewage that usually flows out to sea with the tide sits stagnant, baking in the sun, and the smell that emanates from it is beyond anything the city has experienced before. The stench is not just unpleasant, it's physically overwhelming, causing nausea, headaches, and vomiting. People describe it as a tangible presence, a miasma that hangs over the city and invades every space. The Houses of Parliament, newly rebuilt and positioned directly on the riverbank, are particularly affected. MPs try to conduct business, but the smell seeps through the windows, even through the heavy curtains that have been soaked in chloride of lime in a futile attempt to block it. Meetings are cut short, debates are abandoned, and there's serious discussion about moving Parliament out of London altogether until the situation is resolved. Queen Victoria and Prince Albert attempt a pleasure cruise on the Thames, one of their occasional public outings, but within minutes they're forced to turn back, the smell so overpowering that even the royal couple can't endure it. The newspapers are full of complaints and demands for action. The satirical magazine Punch publishes cartoons showing Death rowing a boat on the filthy river, and the public outcry reaches a fever pitch. Finally, the government acts, and they act quickly, driven by desperation and personal discomfort. Within 18 days of the crisis being acknowledged, legislation is drafted, debated, and passed. The Metropolis Local Management Amendment Act gives the Metropolitan Board of Works the authority and the funding to solve the sewage problem. The sum allocated is £3 million, an enormous amount, equivalent to hundreds of millions in today's currency, and it's to be used to build a comprehensive sewer system for London. The man tasked with designing this system is Joseph Bazalgette, a civil engineer who has been working on plans years, anticipating this moment. Bazalgette's vision is ambitious and elegant. Instead of trying to clean the Thames or somehow treat the sewage, he proposes to intercept it before it reaches the river and redirect it eastward away from the city to outfalls beyond the populated areas where it can be discharged into the Thames estuary and carried out to sea by the tide. To accomplish this, Bazalgette designs a system of intercepting sewers, large underground tunnels that run parallel to the Thames on both the north and south banks. These sewers are massive, some of them large enough to drive a carriage through, and they're built with a gradient that allows gravity to move the sewage eastward. At strategic points, pumping stations are built to lift the sewage from low-lying areas up to the level of the sewers. These pumping stations are architectural marvels, designed to look like Byzantine or Moorish palaces, with ornate brickwork, tall chimneys, and interiors featuring painted columns and decorative ironwork. They house enormous steam-powered engines that pump millions of gallons of sewage every day, and they're a point of pride, a symbol of Victorian engineering prowess. Construction begins in 1859 and continues for more than a decade. It's a monumental undertaking. Thousands of laborers, called navvies, dig through the streets of London, excavating trenches, laying bricks, installing pipes. The work is dangerous. Cave-ins are common. Workers are killed or injured, and the conditions are brutal. Working in all weather, in cramped tunnels, breathing air thick with dust and the fumes from the gas lights they use to see. But the work progresses, and gradually the sewer network takes shape. By 1865, the main sections are complete, and the benefits are immediate. The smell from the Thames diminishes significantly. The river, while still far from clean, is no longer the open sewer it once was. And most importantly, the incidence of cholera and other waterborne diseases drops dramatically. There are still outbreaks, particularly in areas not yet connected to the new sewers, but the scale and frequency of these outbreaks are much reduced. Bazalgette's system is designed to accommodate a population increase from 3 million to 4.5 million, a 50% growth. This is considered generous planning, But within 30 years, London's population exceeds 6 million, doubling since the system was built, and yet the sewers continue to function. In fact, they function into the 21st century. Basalgate's design is so sound, so over-engineered in the best possible way, that large sections of the system are still in use today, more than 150 years later, serving a city of nearly 9 million people. The construction of the sewers also involves another major project, the embanking of the Thames. To create space for the sewers and to protect against flooding, Basalgate designs embankments along large sections of the river in central London. These embankments reclaim land from the river, creating new streets and public spaces, but they also destroy entire neighborhoods. Homes, businesses, wharves, all are demolished to make way for the embankments. The people who lived and worked in these areas are displaced, compensated minimally, if at all, and the tight-knit communities that existed along the waterfront are erased. The embankments, once complete, are elegant promenades, lined with trees and lamp posts, and they become fashionable places to walk and socialize. But beneath them, hidden from view, are the massive sewer tunnels, quietly carrying away the waste of the city. And it's this hidden infrastructure that truly transforms London, making it a livable city rather than a cesspit. The success of Basalgate sewers inspires other cities to undertake similar projects. Manchester, Birmingham, Liverpool, and cities across Europe and America begin building modern sewer systems, learning from London's example. Public health improves across the industrialized world, life expectancy increases, and the great plagues of cholera and typhoid that defined the early Victorian era become, if not eliminated, at least manageable. But even with improved sewers, daily life in a Victorian home still involves intimate encounters with waste. The flush toilet, or water closet, is a luxury that only gradually becomes common. Early versions date back to the late 1500s, but they're not widely adopted until the 1800s. A flush toilet requires a connection to a sewer or a large cesspit, a supply of water, and a certain amount of wealth to afford the installation. For most Victorians, the toilet is a chamber pot, a simple ceramic or metal pot with a handle, kept in the bedroom or in a small closet off the bedroom. Using a chamber pot is a private affair, conducted behind closed doors or with the bed curtains for modesty. Once used, the chamber pot must be emptied, and this task falls to the lowest-ranking servant in a wealthy household or to the user themselves in a working-class home. Emptying a chamber pot means carrying it carefully, trying not to slosh its contents, to an outhouse, a cesspit, or, in some cases, simply out the window into the street or alley below. The practice of tossing waste out the window is more common in earlier centuries, but it persists in the Victorian era, particularly in overcrowded slums where there's no other option. Walking through certain neighborhoods, you learn to stay away from buildings and to listen for the warning cry of "Gardez-l'eau," a corruption of the French "Gardez-l'eau," watch out for the water, though by the time you hear it, it's often too late. The outhouse, or privy, is the standard toilet for most of the population. It's a small wooden shed built over a pit, located at the far end of the yard or in a shared courtyard if you live in a tenement. The privy is simple, a wooden bench with a hole cut in it, and you sit over the hole and let nature take its course. The waste drops into the pit below, where it accumulates. When the pit fills, it must be emptied. And this is the job of the night soil men, who come after dark when the work is considered too disturbing for daylight hours. Night soil men are among the lowest paid and most reviled workers in Victorian society. They arrive with their carts, remove the wooden seat, and shovel the contents of the pit into barrels, which they load onto the cart and haul away, to be sold to farmers as fertilizer. The work is unspeakably foul, the smell is staggering, and the risk of disease is high. But it's also necessary, and the men who do it are, in their own way, essential to the functioning of the city. In some cases, the pits are dug too close to wells, and the waste seeps into the groundwater, contaminating the drinking supply. This leads to outbreaks of typhoid and dysentery, particularly in crowded urban areas. Regulations eventually require that privies be located a certain distance from wells, but enforcement is lax, and the regulations are often ignored. For those with more money, there's the earth closet, a Victorian invention that's seen as a more hygienic alternative to the privy. The earth closet is a seat with a container underneath, and after each use, you pull a lever that releases a measured amount of dry earth or ash over the waste, covering it and absorbing the smell. The container is emptied periodically, and the waste, mixed with earth, can be composted. It's cleaner and less smelly than a privy, but it still requires manual handling of waste, and it never achieves widespread adoption. The flush toilet, when it does arrive, is a revelation. You sit, you do your business, you pull a chain or push a lever, and water rushes through, carrying the waste away through pipes to a sewer or cesspit. The convenience is extraordinary. The reduction in smell is significant, and the social status of having a water closet is considerable. But the early flush toilets have problems. They use an enormous amount of water, which strains the water supply. The pipes freeze in winter. The traps, the U-bends, designed to hold water and prevent sewer gases from entering the house, don't always work correctly, allowing foul smells to waft up from the sewer. And if the toilet is connected to a cesspit rather than a sewer, the cesspit fills quickly and must be emptied frequently. Toilet paper, as we know it, doesn't exist for most of the Victorian period. People use what's available: squares of newspaper, torn-up catalog pages, old rags, leaves, corn cobs in rural areas. The wealthy might use soft paper, but commercially produced toilet paper doesn't appear until the 1850s, and it's expensive and considered a luxury. By the 1880s, perforated rolls of toilet paper are being manufactured, and they gradually become more common. But even then, many people continue to use cheaper alternatives. The bathroom, as a dedicated room containing a toilet, bathtub, and sink, is a late Victorian development, and primarily a feature of upper-class homes. For most people, bathing, toileting, and washing happen in different locations. You wash at the washstand in your bedroom. You use the chamber pot or privy for toileting. And bathing, when it occurs, happens in a portable tub, often in the bedroom or in the kitchen, the only rooms where hot water is easily accessible. Bathing frequency varies enormously depending on class, access to water, and personal preference. The wealthy might bathe once a week or even more often, a luxury made possible by servants who heat and haul the water. The middle class might bathe weekly or every 2 weeks, doing much of the work themselves. The working poor might bathe once a month or less, or not at all, because they lack the resources, the privacy, and the time. The Victorian bathtub is a far cry from the modern version. For the wealthy, it might be a large porcelain or copper tub, sometimes with ornate feet, positioned near the fireplace in the bedroom. Servants fill it bucket by bucket with water heated in the kitchen, a process that can take an hour or more. You undress, step into the tub, sit down, and soak. The water cools quickly in the unheated room, so you don't linger. You soap yourself, rinse, and get out, drying quickly before the chill sets in. For everyone else, the tub is smaller, portable, often made of tin or galvanized steel. It might be a hip bath, a tub shaped like a high-backed chair where you sit with your hips and buttocks in the water while the rest of you is exposed to the cold air. You crouch in this tub, pour water over yourself from a pitcher, soap, rinse, and that's it. It's not comfortable, it's not relaxing, but it gets you clean, more or less. Bath water is rarely used by just one person. In families, it's common to share the bath, using the same water for multiple people. The cleanest person, usually the youngest or the most important, bathes first, and then others take turns. By the time the last person gets in, the water is cold, gray, and scummy with soap and dirt. It's not pleasant, but it's economical. Public baths begin to appear in the mid-1800s, funded by local governments and charities as part of the public health movement. These baths are utilitarian, designed for the working class who have no bathing facilities at home. They consist of rows of individual cubicles, each with a tub and a supply of hot water, rationed by time and volume because heating water is expensive. You pay a small fee, you're given a towel and a piece of soap, you enter your cubicle, and you have perhaps 20 minutes to bathe before the attendant knocks and tells you your time is up. The public baths are not luxurious, but they're appreciated. For people living in one-room tenements, for laborers who spend their days covered in coal dust or factory grime, the opportunity to immerse themselves in hot water and scrub clean is valuable. The baths also serve a social function, a place to gather, to talk, to escape the crowded home for a brief time. Alongside the baths, public wash houses are built, where women can bring their laundry and use large coppers, heated tubs, to boil their clothes. The wash house provides wringers to squeeze out the water, drying rooms to hang the wet laundry, and irons to press the finished items. For a small fee, a woman can accomplish in a few hours what would take all day at home, and the quality of the cleaning is better because the water is hotter and more plentiful. Laundry is a monumental task in the Victorian era. Clothing is heavy, especially when wet, and washing it requires boiling, scrubbing, rinsing, wringing, and drying. For a family, laundry day is an all-consuming affair, usually scheduled for Monday, giving the week's accumulation of dirty clothes and linens. The process begins with sorting. Whites are separated from colors because they'll be boiled together. Delicates, items that can't withstand boiling, are set aside for gentler treatment. Water is hauled from the pump or well, or, if you're fortunate, from a tap, and heated in the copper, a large pot built into the corner of the kitchen or wash house. Soap is grated into the water, or soap flakes are added, and the clothes are submerged. Boiling serves two purposes. It kills lice, bed bugs, and other vermin that live in the fabric, and it loosens the dirt. After boiling for 20 or 30 minutes, the clothes are fished out with a wooden stick and transferred to a wash tub, where they're scrubbed on a washboard, a ridged surface that provides friction to help remove ground-in dirt. Scrubbing is hard on the hands. The hot water and harsh soap crack and redden the skin, and the repeated motion strains the wrists and shoulders. After scrubbing, the clothes are rinsed, which requires multiple changes of water to remove all the soap. They're wrung out by hand, twisting the fabric to squeeze out as much water as possible. Or, if you have access to a mangle, a device with rollers, you feed the clothes through and crank a handle to press the water out. The clothes are then hung to dry, on a line in the yard if the weather allows, or draped over furniture and strung on lines across the kitchen if it's raining. Drying can take all day or several days in damp weather, and in winter, clothes hung outside freeze stiff on the line. Once dry, they're ironed, using heavy flat irons heated on the stove. Ironing is hot, tedious work, requiring constant reheating of the irons and care not to scorch the fabric. Starching is applied to collars, cuffs, and other items that need to be stiff, and this adds another layer of labor. For the wealthy, laundry is sent out to professional laundresses, women who take in washing as their livelihood. These women work from early morning to late at night, boiling, scrubbing, rinsing, and ironing vast quantities of laundry for multiple clients. The work destroys their hands and their backs, and the pay is meager, but it's a way to earn money, particularly for widows and unmarried women who have few other options. The emphasis on clean, white linen as a mark of respectability drives this industry. A gentleman is judged by the crispness of his collar, a lady by the whiteness of her petticoats visible at the hem of her dress. Dirt is equated with poverty and immorality, cleanliness with virtue and success, and so people scrub and iron and starch, investing hours of labor into maintaining appearances. But underneath all this emphasis on cleanliness, there's a darker reality. The products used to achieve this cleanliness are often toxic. Laundry soap made with lye can cause chemical burns. Bleaches used to whiten fabrics contain chlorine or acids that weaken the fibers and release fumes that damage the lungs. Starches are sometimes made with lead or other heavy metals. The dyes in clothing, particularly the fashionable bright greens and reds of the 1860s, contain arsenic or other poisons that leach out when the fabric gets wet, causing skin rashes or worse. Women's undergarments in particular are a health hazard. The dyes used to color stockings and petticoats can contain aniline dyes, which are toxic, or they might use arsenic-based dyes, which absorb through the skin. There are documented cases of women suffering arsenic poisoning from their clothing, presenting with symptoms like vomiting, diarrhea, skin lesions, and hair loss. The cosmetics industry is another source of toxicity. Victorian beauty standards favor pale skin, the paler the better, because a tan indicates outdoor labor and lower class status. To achieve this pallor, women use face powders and creams that contain lead, zinc, bismuth, or arsenic. These products work in the sense that they make the skin look white and smooth, but they also accumulate in the body, causing progressive poisoning. Lead-based cosmetics have been used for centuries, and despite increasing evidence of their danger, they remain popular throughout the Victorian era. The lead gives the skin a luminous, porcelain-like appearance, but over time it causes neurological damage, kidney failure, anemia, and death. The symptoms of lead poisoning include fatigue, headaches, abdominal pain, constipation, joint pain, and cognitive impairment. Prolonged exposure can cause paralysis and blindness. Arsenic is another common ingredient used in complexion wafers, soaps, and creams. It's marketed as a way to improve the skin, to give it a youthful glow, and to remove blemishes. Some women consume arsenic wafers daily, believing them to be a beauty treatment. Arsenic does, in fact, plump the skin by causing fluid retention, and it can give the eyes a bright, glassy look. But it's also a cumulative poison. Chronic arsenic poisoning causes skin lesions, hair loss, digestive problems, and eventually organ failure. Mercury is used in rouge, eyeshadow, and eyeliner. It gives vibrant colors, particularly bright reds and pinks, but it's absorbed through the skin and accumulates in the brain and kidneys. Mercury poisoning, also known as Mad Hatter's disease, after the hat makers who worked with mercury-treated felt, causes tremors, mood swings, irritability, insomnia, and cognitive decline. In severe cases, it leads to psychosis and death. Nightshade, or belladonna, is used in eye drops to dilate the pupils, creating a wide-eyed, doe-like look that's considered attractive. The drops are agonizingly painful, and they cause temporary blindness and extreme light sensitivity. But fashion demands sacrifice. Prolonged use can lead to permanent vision damage. Despite the dangers, these products are sold openly, advertised widely, and used by women across the social spectrum. The regulations that govern food and drug safety don't yet exist, or they're minimal and poorly enforced. Anyone can manufacture and sell cosmetics, making any claims they wish, and consumers have no way to verify the ingredients or the safety of the products. Quack medicines are another huge industry. These are bottled concoctions sold as cure-alls, promising to treat everything from tuberculosis to cancer to sexual dysfunction. The ingredients are rarely listed, and when they are, they're often lies. Many patent medicines are high in alcohol, sometimes 40 or 50%, making them essentially hard liquor sold as medicine. People become addicted without realizing it, drinking their medicine multiple times a day. Others contain opium or morphine, powerful painkillers that are also highly addictive. Laudanum, a tincture of opium in alcohol, is available over the counter and used for everything from headaches to menstrual cramps to teething pain in infants. Mothers dose their babies with laudanum to make them sleep, sometimes giving fatal overdoses. Adults take it for chronic pain and become dependent, requiring ever-increasing doses to achieve the same effect. Cocaine is marketed as a wonder drug, an ingredient in tonics and lozenges, praised for its ability to boost energy and mood. It's not yet recognized as addictive or dangerous, and it's used casually. Heroin, synthesized by Bayer in 1898, is marketed as a non-addictive substitute for morphine and sold over the counter as a cough suppressant. The irony is tragic. The lack of regulation extends to food as well. Adulteration is rampant. Bread is bulked out with chalk, alum, or plaster. Milk is watered down and whitened with chalk or plaster. Tea is mixed with dried leaves from other plants, or with tea that's already been used and dried again. Coffee is cut with chicory, acorns, or even sawdust. Candy is colored with lead or copper-based dyes. Beer is adulterated with strychnine to make it more bitter. These adulterations are not just fraudulent, they're dangerous. Alum in bread can cause digestive problems and constipation. Lead in candy poisons children. Watered-down milk provides inadequate nutrition, contributing to malnutrition and rickets. Strychnine in beer can cause convulsions and death if the dose is high enough. It's not until the later part of the Victorian era that laws are passed to regulate food and drug safety. The Sale of Food and Drugs Act of 1875 is a milestone, requiring that food and drugs be pure and properly labeled. It's a start, but enforcement is weak, and unscrupulous manufacturers find ways around the regulations. Daily life in Victorian England is shaped by these dangers, known and unknown. You wake, you wash with cold water, you dress in layers of clothing that trap sweat and odors. You might brush your teeth with powder that contains brick dust, or you might not brush them at all. You eat bread that might contain chalk, drink tea that might be adulterated, apply cosmetics that might poison you. You empty your chamber pot, or you use a privy that might contaminate your water supply. You breathe air thick with coal smoke and industrial emissions. You work long hours in dangerous conditions, and if you're injured, there's no workers' compensation, no safety net. And yet, life goes on. People adapt, they cope, they find moments of joy and beauty. They fall in love, raise families, create art, build businesses. The Victorian era is one of tremendous innovation and progress, alongside tremendous suffering and inequality. It's the era of the Industrial Revolution, of steam engines and railways, of telegraphs and photography. It's the era of Charles Dickens and the Bronte sisters, of Darwin and Faraday, of engineers like Buzz Aldrin who build the infrastructure that saves millions of lives. By the end of Victoria's reign in 1901, the world has changed dramatically from when she ascended the throne in 1837. Life expectancy has increased from the low 40s to the low 50s. Infant mortality has dropped, though it's still appallingly high by modern standards. Cholera and typhoid are no longer the mass killers they once were, thanks to improved sanitation and clean water. Germ theory has been established, and the medical profession is becoming more scientific, less reliant on bloodletting and mercury. Public health infrastructure is in place, with sewers, water supplies, waste collection, and public baths. Laws regulate working conditions, housing standards, food and drug safety, though enforcement remains a challenge. Education is compulsory, at least in theory, giving working-class children access to literacy and basic knowledge. But inequality persists. The slums are still crowded and filthy. The working poor still struggle to afford adequate food, clothing, and shelter. Women have limited rights. Child labor, while regulated, is still common. The benefits of progress are not evenly distributed, and the gap between rich and poor remains vast. As we look back at Victorian hygiene from the vantage point of the modern world, it's easy to feel superior, to marvel at their ignorance and their willingness to use toxic substances. But we should also recognize that they were doing the best they could with the knowledge they had. They didn't know about bacteria and viruses. They didn't understand the long-term effects of heavy metal exposure. They were navigating a world in transition, caught between old beliefs and new discoveries, trying to maintain health and dignity in circumstances that made both difficult. The Victorians gave us the foundation of modern public health. They built the sewers, the water systems, the legal frameworks that protect us today. They learned, through bitter experience, the importance of sanitation, the connection between clean water and health, the need for regulation and oversight. Their mistakes taught us what not to do, and their successes showed us what's possible when society commits to solving public health problems. So, when you turn on your tap and clean water flows, when you flush your toilet and the waste disappears, when you take for granted that your food is safe and your medicine is regulated, remember the Victorians. Remember their struggles, their innovations, and their resilience. They lived in a world far dirtier and more dangerous than ours, and they worked generation by generation to make it better. If you've enjoyed this journey through Victorian hygiene, or if it's helped you drift towards sleep, consider leaving a like and subscribing to the channel. Your support helps us continue exploring these quiet corners of history. And if you're still awake, drop a comment telling us where you're listening from and what era of history you'd like us to explore next. Until then, rest well, dream of clean water and modern plumbing, and be grateful, deeply grateful, for soap. The wash basin sits on its stand across the room, a porcelain bowl nested in a wooden frame, and beside it stands a matching pitcher. Last night, a servant filled that pitcher if you're among the fortunate classes. If you're not, you filled it yourself from the pump down the street or the well in the courtyard. Either way, that water has been sitting all night in an unheated room, and it is absolutely teeth-chatteringly cold. There is no hot water on tap. There is no tap at all in most bedrooms. Hot water, when you want it, must be heated over a fire, carried up flights of stairs in heavy buckets, and poured carefully so as not to scald yourself or splash the carpet. But this is morning, and most mornings you make do with cold. You pour the water from the pitcher into the basin, the sound echoing in the quiet room, and you brace yourself. The first splash against your face is a shock. But you've done this every morning of your life, so you keep going. You cup your hands, bring water to your cheeks, your forehead, the back of your neck. You might use a cloth, a square of linen kept specifically for this purpose, dampened and pressed against your skin. The goal is not to soak yourself. The goal is to remove the visible dirt, the sleep from your eyes, the faint sheen of perspiration from a night spent under heavy covers. Soap, if you use it, is a luxury. Not an exotic luxury, mind you, but one that costs money and must be purchased or made. The soap available to most Victorians is harsh, made from animal fats and lye, and it doesn't lather the way modern soap does. It's a thick, waxy substance that you rub between your hands or against the cloth, and it leaves your skin feeling tight and dry. The wealthy might afford imported soaps, French soaps scented with lavender or rose, or the famous Pears soap, transparent and promoted as gentle enough for delicate complexions. By the latter half of the 1800s, soap manufacturers are beginning to understand marketing, And they plaster advertisements everywhere, claiming their products will keep the pores open, the skin clear, the hands soft. Cleanliness, they insist, is next to godliness. And for the Victorian middle and upper classes, this is not just advertising copy. It's a moral imperative. Cleanliness has become a marker of respectability, of social standing, of moral character. To be clean, or at least to appear clean, is to signal that you are a person of worth, of self-discipline, of proper breeding. The middle classes, in particular, are obsessed with this presentation. Their homes are cleaned with a fervor that borders on militant. Their persons are groomed with meticulous care. Not because they understand germ theory, which is still being debated and won't be widely accepted until the latter part of Victoria's reign, but because dirt is associated with poverty, with the working classes, with moral failing. So you wash your face and hands each morning. You might wash your neck, your ears, the parts of you that will be visible to the world. But a full body wash, that's another matter entirely. Most Victorians do not bathe daily. Many do not bathe weekly. The reasons are practical. Water is heavy, heating it is labor-intensive, and privacy is not guaranteed. But there's also a lingering suspicion about bathing that carries over from earlier centuries. Too much washing, some believe, can weaken the constitution, open the pores to illness, or strip the body of its natural protections. Your grooming continues. Men shave, or attempt to, using straight razors that require skill and a steady hand. A bad shave can leave you nicked and bleeding, and there's no styptic pencil waiting in the medicine cabinet. Women attend to their hair, which is a production in itself. Victorian high styles are elaborate, involving pins, combs, ribbings, and, for the wealthy, hair pieces made from real human hair, purchased from women desperate enough to sell their own. These styles are not created fresh each morning. They're built over days, sometimes weeks, and maintained with careful brushing and the occasional application of oils or pomades. Hair washing is infrequent. Books on hygiene and beauty from the late Victorian era suggest that women with oily hair should wash it every 2 weeks, while those with normal hair might go a full month between washings. The process is arduous. There is no shampoo as we know it. Instead, women break eggs over their heads, work the yolks and whites into their scalps, and then rinse with pitchers of water. Or they use diluted vinegar, or a mixture of soap and rainwater. The whole affair takes hours. And then comes the drying, which in a cold, drafty house with no hairdryer can take most of a day. So hair stays up, pinned and hidden under caps or bonnets, let down only in the privacy of the bedroom and only for a husband to see. Men, too, are particular about their hair and facial hair. Beards and mustaches are fashionable for much of the Victorian period, and they require maintenance. Waxes, oils, and special combs keep the whiskers in shape. A well-groomed beard is a sign of dignity and masculinity, while a scraggly one suggests neglect, or worse, poverty. After washing, you dress. This is not a quick process. Victorian clothing is layered, complicated and designed more for modesty and fashion than for ease of movement or hygiene. Women begin with a chemise, a loose linen or cotton undergarment that sits against the skin. Over this goes the corset, which must be laced tight, often requiring assistance. The corset shapes the body into the fashionable silhouette of the era, tiny waist, pronounced bust. But it also traps sweat and restricts breathing. Next come the petticoats, sometimes several of them, each adding bulk and warmth. Then the dress itself, with its high collar, long sleeves, and layers of fabric. Men have it slightly easier, but not by much. They start with a shirt, typically white linen or cotton, which serves the same function as the chemise, to absorb sweat and protect the outer clothing. Over this goes the waistcoat, the jacket, the cravat or necktie. Trousers are held up with suspenders, not belts, and they're made of wool or heavy cotton. In summer, this is sweltering. In winter, it's barely adequate. And here's the thing about all this clothing. It doesn't get washed often. Outer garments, the dresses and suits, are rarely, if ever, washed. They're brushed, aired out, spot cleaned when necessary, but submerging a Victorian gown in water would ruin it, shrink the fabric, destroy the structure, ruin the dyes. So these garments are worn again and again, accumulating sweat, skin oils, food stains, and street grime. The undergarments, though, those get washed. The chemise, the drawers, the undershirts, they can be boiled, scrubbed, and hung out to dry. This is why Victorians are so particular about white linen. Wearing clean, white undergarments, visible at the collar and cuffs, is a way of signaling cleanliness even when the rest of your clothing hasn't seen soap in months. It's a performance of hygiene, a visible marker that you have the resources to launder regularly, which requires not only soap and water, but also time and labor. Laundry is back-breaking work. If you're wealthy, servants do it. If you're not, you do it yourself, and it consumes an entire day, sometimes more. Water must be hauled, heated over fires in massive pots. Clothes are boiled to kill whatever might be living in them, then scrubbed on washboards, rinsed, run out by hand, and hung to dry. In cities where space is limited, laundry hangs from windows and across alleyways, dripping onto the heads of passers-by. In winter, it freezes stiff on the line. In summer, it attracts flies. But back to your morning routine. You're dressed now, groomed as best you can manage, and you're ready to face the day. Except there's one more matter to attend to, and it's the one nobody talks about in polite company. You need to use the toilet. In a wealthy Victorian home, you might have a water closet, an early version of the flush toilet. It's a porcelain bowl connected to pipes that, in theory, carry waste away to a sewer or cesspit. In practice, these early toilets are finicky. They clog, they leak, they smell. The pipes are poorly designed, prone to backflow, and in many cases, they empty directly into a cesspit in the basement, which fills slowly over time and must be emptied by workers known as night soil men. If you don't have a water closet, and most people don't, you have a chamber pot. It's a ceramic or metal pot, often kept in a cabinet near the bed or tucked discreetly under it. You use it during the night or first thing in the morning, and then someone, likely a servant or yourself, must empty it. This involves carrying the pot, trying very hard not to slosh its contents, down to the privy in the yard or to a larger container that will be collected later. The privy, or outhouse, is a small wooden structure built over a pit. You sit on a wooden bench with a hole cut in it, and everything drops into the pit below. In summer, the smell is overwhelming, a thick, choking stench that attracts clouds of flies. In winter, it's freezing, and there's the very real risk of frostbite in delicate areas. Toilet paper, as we know it, doesn't exist for most of the Victorian period. People use whatever is available: scraps of newspaper, old rags, leaves, corn cobs in rural areas. The wealthy might use soft paper, but it's expensive and not commonly available until the late 1800s. In cities, the situation is even grimmer. Tenement buildings house dozens of families, and they might share a single privy in a courtyard. These privies are rarely emptied often enough, and they overflow, seeping into the ground, contaminating wells, and creating pools of filth that children play near and animals drink from. The night soil men come around after dark, when the work is deemed too disturbing for daylight hours, and they shovel the waste into carts to be hauled out to the countryside and sold as fertilizer. Some homes, particularly in wealthier areas, have cesspits, large underground tanks that collect waste. These, too, must be emptied, and when they're full, the smell seeps into the house. There are recorded cases of cesspits exploding from the buildup of methane gas, blowing out walls and showering the neighborhood with unspeakable filth. The connection between sanitation and disease is not yet fully understood. Most Victorians believe in the miasma theory, the idea that diseases are caused by bad air, by the foul smells emanating from sewage, rotting garbage, and stagnant water. So they try to mask the smells. They burn perfumes, hang pomanders, douse their handkerchiefs in scented oils. They believe that if they can't smell the filth, they're safe from its effects. They're wrong, of course. The real danger is in the water they drink, the water that's been contaminated by the very waste they're trying to ignore. Cholera is the great killer of the Victorian age. It sweeps through London in waves, in 1831, in 1849, in 1854. In 1866, killing thousands each time. The disease is horrifying. It starts with stomach cramps and diarrhea, and within hours, a healthy person can be dead from dehydration. Entire neighborhoods are wiped out. Families lose multiple members in a single week, and no one knows why. A physician named John Snow has a theory. He believes cholera is spread through contaminated water, not through bad air. In 1854, during an outbreak in Soho, he maps the cases and traces them to a single water pump on Broad Street. He removes the pump handle, and the outbreak stops. But his findings are largely ignored. The miasma theory is too entrenched, too convenient. It's easier to blame the smell than to confront the reality that the city's infrastructure is killing its people. The Thames, London's great river, is also its great sewer. For centuries, it's been used as a dumping ground for waste, both human and industrial. Slaughterhouses empty blood and offal into it. Factories pour in chemicals and dyes. Households flush their cesspits into it. And then, remarkably, water companies draw from the Thames to supply drinking water to London's residents. The water is filthy, thick with sediment and worse. A journalist writes that drinking a tumbler of London water means consuming more living organisms than there are people on Earth. But it's not until the summer of 1858 that something finally changes. That summer is brutally hot, with temperatures reaching 34 to 36 degrees Celsius in the shade and climbing to 48 degrees in direct sunlight. The Thames, already low from a dry spell, becomes a stagnant, festering swamp. The sewage that usually disperses with the current now sits baking in the heat. The smell is beyond description, nauseating, overpowering. It permeates the entire city, seeping into homes, shops, and most significantly, into the Houses of Parliament, which sit right on the riverbank. This event becomes known as the Great Stink, and it's the crisis that finally forces action. MPs can't conduct business. The smell is so unbearable they flee the chambers. Queen Victoria and Prince Albert attempt a pleasure cruise on the Thames and have to turn back within minutes. Curtains in Parliament are soaked in chloride of lime in a futile attempt to block the odor. Over 200 tons of lime are dumped into the Thames to try to break down the sewage. Nothing works. Benjamin Disraeli, the Chancellor of the Exchequer, stands before Parliament and describes the Thames as a Stygian pool, reeking with ineffable and unbearable horror. For once, the politicians act quickly. Within 18 days, a bill is drafted, debated, and passed into law. It authorizes the spending of £3 million, an enormous sum, to build a new sewer system for London. The man tasked with designing this system is Joseph Bazalgette, a civil engineer who has been drawing up plans for years. His vision is ambitious. A network of massive underground sewers, some larger than the train tunnels being built at the same time, that will intercept waste before it reaches the Thames and carry it eastward, away from the city, to outfalls where it can be discharged into the estuary and carried out to sea by the tide. Construction begins in 1859. It's a monumental project, requiring 318 million bricks and the excavation of 2.7 million cubic yards of earth. Pumping stations are built at strategic points, architectural marvels designed like cathedrals to house the massive steam engines that will move the sewage through the system. The work is dangerous. Laborers dig through layers of London's history, through medieval streets and Roman ruins, through clay and gravel and pockets of methane gas. Cave-ins are common. Men are injured. Some are killed. But by 1865, the main part of the system is complete. Over 80 miles of intercepting sewers now run parallel to the Thames, along with more than 1,000 miles of street sewers. The impact is immediate and dramatic. The smell from the Thames diminishes. Cholera outbreaks become less frequent and less deadly. In 1866, a cholera epidemic strikes the East End, but it's confined to the one area not yet connected to Bazalgette's sewers, proving Dr. Snow's waterborne theory once and for all. Bazalgette designs the system to accommodate London's population growing from 3 million to 4.5 million. Within 30 years, the population has doubled again to 6 million, and the sewers are still functioning. They function to this day, more than 150 years later, a testament to Victorian engineering and the desperation of the Great Stink. But sanitation improvements don't spread evenly. The wealthy benefit first. Their homes are connected to the new sewers. Their water is cleaner. Their neighborhoods are safer. The poor, packed into tenements and slums, wait. They continue to use overflowing privies and contaminated wells. Their children continue to die from preventable diseases. The mortality rate in London's poorest districts is double, sometimes triple, that of the wealthiest areas. Inequality in hygiene is inequality in survival. This divide is visible in every aspect of daily life. The rich bathe in porcelain tubs filled by servants who haul hot water up from the kitchens. The poor, if they bathe at all, use a shared tin tub filled from a communal pump. And they take turns, entire families using the same water, which grows colder and grayer with each person. Public baths and wash houses begin to appear in the 1840s and 50s, funded by local governments and charities. The Baths and Wash Houses Act of 1846 allows municipalities to build facilities where working-class people can bathe and wash their clothes for a small fee. These bathhouses are utilitarian, built for function rather than comfort. They have rows of individual cubicles, each with a tub and a supply of hot water, measured carefully, because it costs money. You pay your pennies, you get your time, and then you're out. The experience is not luxurious. The water is often tepid by the time it reaches your tub. The soap is harsh. The towels are thin and rough. But for people living in one-room tenements with no running water and no privacy, it's a revelation. For the first time, they can wash their entire bodies in warm water. They can scrub their children. They can feel, however briefly, clean. The wash houses attached to these bathhouses are equally transformative. For a fee, women can bring their laundry and use large coppers, big pots heated by fires, to boil their clothes. They can use wringers to squeeze out the water instead of doing it by hand, which saves hours of labor and prevents the raw, chapped hands that plague washerwomen. The clothes dry in heated drying rooms, so there's no waiting for a sunny day or finding a place to hang wet laundry in a cramped flat. These facilities are part of a broader movement toward public health reform. Reformers, often driven by a mix of genuine compassion and a fear that diseases from the slums will spread to wealthier neighborhoods, push for better housing, cleaner streets, safer water. They investigate working conditions in factories and mines. They document the lives of the poor in reports that shock the middle and upper classes. They campaign for legislation that will improve sanitation, regulate food safety, and provide medical care. But progress is slow and resistance is strong. Landlords don't want to spend money on improvements. Factory owners don't want regulations. Many people believe that poverty is a moral failing, that the poor are poor because they're lazy or immoral, and therefore they don't deserve help. The idea that disease can spread regardless of moral character, that a cholera outbreak in the slums can kill a duke as easily as a dock worker, is slow to take hold. Meanwhile, Daily life continues, and with it the routines of hygiene, such as they are. Dental care is rudimentary and often painful. Toothbrushes exist, usually made with boar bristles set into bone or ivory handles, but they're expensive and not widely used. The poor clean their teeth, if they clean them at all, with a cloth and water, or with a twig chewed to fray the end. Tooth powder is available, made from chalk, charcoal, or even crushed brick, mixed with flavoring like mint or clove. You dip your brush or cloth in the powder and scrub. The results are mixed. Victorian teeth are not the gleaming white of modern smiles. They're yellowed, often crooked, and frequently missing. Tooth decay is rampant, driven by diets high in sugar and refined flour. And when a tooth goes bad, the only solution is extraction. Dentists, as a profession, barely exist. Tooth extraction is often performed by barbers, blacksmiths, or traveling quacks who set up stalls at fairs and markets. They promise painless removal, but there's no anesthesia for most of the Victorian period. You sit in a chair, or more likely stand, while someone grips your tooth with pliers and pulls. The pain is excruciating. The risk of infection is high. Sometimes the tooth breaks, leaving fragments in the gum. Sometimes the wrong tooth is pulled. For the wealthy, there are dentists with training and skill. And by the 1840s, some are using ether or chloroform to dull the pain. They can fit dentures, false teeth made from ivory, porcelain, or even real human teeth pulled from the mouths of the dead or the desperately poor. These dentures are uncomfortable, ill-fitting, and prone to falling out at inopportune moments, but they're better than gaping holes. The poor have no such options. They live with the pain until the tooth falls out on its own or the infection spreads. Dental abscesses can be deadly, the infection traveling to the bloodstream and causing sepsis. Many die from what we would consider a minor dental problem. And then there's the matter of bad breath, which is pervasive. Without effective dental care, without regular brushing, without modern toothpaste, most Victorians have breath that ranges from unpleasant to unbearable. Mouthwashes are sold, usually alcohol-based and flavored with peppermint or cloves, but they mask the smell rather than addressing the underlying decay. Personal grooming extends to other areas as well. Body hair, for instance, is not something Victorians talk about openly, but it's something they deal with. Men shave their faces or cultivate beards and mustaches. Shaving the body is rare, almost unheard of for men, and for women, the question of body hair is complicated by modesty and the layers of clothing they wear. Women do not shave their legs or underarms in the Victorian era. The practice simply doesn't exist. Their dresses have long sleeves and high necklines, and their legs are covered by multiple layers of fabric. There's no reason to remove hair that no one will see. Pubic hair is never discussed, never mentioned, and certainly never removed. The very idea would be scandalous. But facial hair on women is another matter. A woman with a noticeable mustache or beard is subject to ridicule and shame. Various methods are used to remove unwanted facial hair. Plucking with tweezers, which is painful and time-consuming. Applying depilatory creams made from quicklime and arsenic, which burn the hair away along with a layer of skin. Or using pumice stones to abrade the hair. None of these methods are pleasant, and some are downright dangerous. but the social pressure to conform is intense. Cosmetics, too, are a minefield. The Victorian ideal of beauty, particularly in the early and middle parts of the era, is pale skin, rosy cheeks, and a delicate, almost consumptive appearance. Tan skin is associated with outdoor labor, with the working class, so the upper classes go to great lengths to maintain their pallor. White face powders are popular, and many are made with lead. Lead-based cosmetics have been used for centuries, and despite evidence of their toxicity, they remain in use because they produce that desired white porcelain effect. Women dust their faces with these powders, inhaling the particles, absorbing the lead through their skin. Over time, the lead accumulates, causing nerve damage, kidney failure, brain damage, and death. Arsenic, too, is everywhere. It's in wallpapers, where it creates vibrant greens and reds. It's in fabric dyes. It's in beauty products, particularly those advertised as complexion wafers or skin whiteners. Women eat arsenic wafers, believing they'll improve their skin, and in some ways they do. Arsenic is a poison, and it causes the body to retain fluids, plumping the skin and giving it a smooth appearance. But it's also, well, poison. Chronic arsenic poisoning causes vomiting, diarrhea, hair loss, skin lesions, and eventually organ failure. Rouge is used to add color to the cheeks. But again, many formulations contain toxic substances. Mercury is a common ingredient in rouge, as well as in eyeliner and eyeshadow. Prolonged use leads to mercury poisoning, which causes tremors, mood swings, memory loss, and what's known as Mad Hatter disease, named for the hat makers who worked with mercury-treated felt and often went mad as a result. Nightshade, a deadly poison, is used in eye drops to dilate the pupils, creating a wide-eyed, doe-like appearance that's considered attractive. The drops are agonizing, and they cause temporary blindness, but fashion demands sacrifice. Women use them before balls and social events, enduring the pain and the blurred vision for the sake of beauty. Hair dyes are equally dangerous. To cover gray hair, people use dyes containing lead, silver, or other heavy metals. These dyes don't just coat the hair, they're absorbed through the scalp. Repeated use leads to poisoning. Some dyes are so toxic that they cause the hair to fall out entirely, defeating the purpose. And it's not just women using these dangerous products. Men, too, use hair dyes, pomades, and beard waxes that contain questionable ingredients. The Victorian emphasis on appearance, on presenting oneself as respectable and well-groomed, drives people to take risks they don't fully understand. The lack of understanding extends to medicine and health practices as well. When illness strikes, Victorians turn to a bewildering array of treatments, some helpful, most not, and a few downright lethal. The medical profession is in a state of flux. There are trained doctors, men who have studied at universities and hospitals. But there are also quacks, charlatans who set up shop and sell miracle cures for everything from tuberculosis to gout. Patent medicines are wildly popular. These are bottled concoctions sold in pharmacies, through mail order, and by traveling salesmen. They have names like Dr. Mackenzie's Improved Harmless Arsenic Complexion Wafers, or Mrs. Winslow's Soothing Syrup. The labels make extravagant claims. They'll cure consumption, ease childbirth, soothe teething babies, restore vitality. The actual ingredients are rarely listed, and when they are, they're often lies. Many patent medicines are little more than alcohol, sometimes as much as 40 or 50%. People take them regularly and become alcoholics without realizing it. Others contain opium or laudanum, a tincture of opium, which is addictive and often deadly. Laudanum is given to children for toothaches, to fussy babies to make them sleep, to adults for pain. Overdoses are common, and addiction is rampant. For toothaches, the recommended treatment is often laudanum or opium, applied directly to the gum or taken internally in doses that would horrify modern doctors. For headaches, people might use mercury-based pills. For digestive issues, they take calomel, another mercury compound. For a cough, they might use a syrup containing morphine or heroin. Yes, heroin. It's marketed by Bayer as a non-addictive substitute for morphine, and it's sold over the counter. Bloodletting is still practiced, though it's falling out of favor. The theory is that many illnesses are caused by an excess of blood, so removing some will restore balance. Doctors use lancets to open veins, or they apply leeches, which attach to the skin and suck blood. The practice weakens patients, making them more susceptible to infection, but it persists because it's traditional and because doctors need to offer some form of treatment, even if it's ineffective. For women, the medical establishment has its own set of horrors. The Victorian view of women is that they are delicate, prone to hysteria, governed by their reproductive organs. Any number of complaints, from anxiety to fatigue to simply being difficult, are diagnosed as hysteria. The treatments range from bed rest to electric shocks to, in extreme cases, surgical removal of the ovaries or uterus. Menstruation is seen as both natural and deeply problematic. Of course, it's not discussed openly. Polite society pretends it doesn't exist. Women are expected to manage their periods discreetly, to continue their daily activities without acknowledging that anything is happening. And managing a period in the Victorian era is a challenge. There are no disposable pads, no tampons. Women make their own menstrual cloths from rags, old fabric, flannel, anything absorbent. These cloths are folded and pinned inside their undergarments, held in place by a belt or simply by the tight layers of clothing. The cloths are washed and reused, boiled if possible, though not everyone has access to the resources to boil laundry regularly. Some women, particularly those in workhouses or factories, simply bleed into their clothes. They don't have spare fabric for rags. They don't have privacy to change. The floors of mills are sometimes lined with straw or sawdust to absorb not just industrial spills, but menstrual blood. It's a grim reality that no one speaks of. By the late Victorian period, commercial menstrual products begin to appear. Sanitary belts are sold in catalogs, advertised in vague language to avoid offending sensibilities. These are cloth belts that go around the waist, with straps that attach to absorbent pads. The pads are washable and reusable. Disposable pads are invented in 1888, initially by nurses who noticed that the wood pulp bandages used in hospitals are excellent at absorbing blood. Johnson & Johnson begins selling Lister's towels, one of the first commercial disposable menstrual products, but they're expensive and not widely adopted until later. Pregnancy and childbirth are their own ordeals. Maternal mortality is high. 1 in 100 women dies in childbirth. And for those who survive, the risk of infection, hemorrhage, or lasting injury is significant. Childbed fever, or puerperal sepsis, is a common killer. It's caused by bacterial infection, often introduced by doctors who move from patient to patient, from dissecting cadavers to delivering babies without washing their hands. The idea that hand washing could prevent disease is not widely accepted until late in the century. Dr. Ignaz Semmelweis, working in Vienna in the 1840s, demonstrates that when doctors wash their hands in chlorinated lime solution before attending births, the death rate from childbed fever drops dramatically. He's ridiculed for his findings, his ideas are dismissed, and he dies in an asylum, his work unrecognized until decades later. Victorian women give birth at home, attended by midwives, or, if they're wealthy, by doctors. Pain relief is limited. Chloroform begins to be used in the 1850s, famously by Queen Victoria herself during the birth of her 8th child. But many doctors and clergy oppose it, arguing that pain in childbirth is ordained by God, a punishment for Eve's sin. Women are expected to endure. After birth, women enter a period of confinement, lying in, which lasts several weeks. They're expected to stay in bed, avoid exertion, and recover. For wealthy women, this is a time of relative rest, attended by servants. For working-class women, it's an economic disaster. They can't afford weeks without work. They're back on their feet within days, weakened, often hemorrhaging, performing manual labor because there's no other choice. Infant mortality is staggering. Nearly 1 in 3 children in England doesn't reach the age of 5. The causes are many: disease, malnutrition, accidents, neglect. Babies are particularly vulnerable to cholera, typhoid, and dysentery, all waterborne diseases. They're also vulnerable to the toxic substances in their environment. Teething babies are given soothing syrups containing laudanum or morphine. Sick babies are dosed with calomel. Hungry babies are fed bread soaked in contaminated water. The poor conditions in which many families live compound the problem. Overcrowding is endemic in urban areas. Entire families, sometimes multiple families, live in single rooms with no ventilation, no sanitation, no clean water. Children sleep 4 or 5 to a bed. Diseases spread quickly. Tuberculosis, the White Plague, thrives in these conditions, killing slowly, wasting its victims over months or years. The working conditions for children and adults alike are brutal. Factories are loud, dangerous, and filthy. Workers, including children as young as 5 or 6, spend 14 hours a day in environments filled with dust, fumes, and moving machinery. Accidents are common. Limbs are mangled, fingers lost, backs broken. And the compensation? There is none. Injured workers are simply replaced. The streets of Victorian cities are no cleaner than the homes or factories. They're unpaved, muddy, filled with horse manure and refuse. In London, an estimated 50,000 horses work the streets, pulling carriages, carts, and omnibuses. Each horse produces 15 to 30 pounds of manure a day, and it's left where it falls. Rain turns the streets into rivers of filth. Dry weather turns the manure into dust that coats everything. Dead animals are a common sight. Horses collapse from overwork and are left to rot where they fall until someone hauls the carcass away. Dogs, cats, rats, all manner of creatures die in the streets and gutters. In slaughterhouse districts, the streets run with blood. The smell is overwhelming, a constant miasma that clings to your clothes and hair. And yet people live their lives. They go to work, they raise families, they fall in love, they laugh. They adapt to the conditions because they have no choice. For many Victorians, this is simply the way life is. They don't know any different. The middle and upper classes might read about conditions in the slums, might feel a pang of pity or disgust, but it's abstract, distant. It doesn't touch their daily lives. But the reformers keep pushing. The public health acts of the 1840s and 1870s begin to make a difference. Local authorities are given responsibilities for sanitation and waste management. Regulations are passed requiring landlords to maintain their properties. Inspectors are appointed to enforce these regulations, though enforcement is often lax. Schools begin to teach basic hygiene. Children are instructed to wash their hands, to keep their nails clean, to cover their mouths when they cough. These seem like small things, but they save lives. The germ theory of disease, once controversial, becomes accepted. Louis Pasteur's work on microorganisms, Robert Koch's identification of specific bacteria as causes of specific diseases, these discoveries transform medicine and public health. By the end of the Victorian era, life expectancy has increased. Infant mortality has dropped. Cholera outbreaks are less frequent. The infrastructure of modern sanitation is in place, or at least the foundation for it. Clean water is more accessible. Sewers carry waste away from living areas. Public baths and wash houses provide hygiene services for those who can't afford them at home. But inequality persists. The benefits of these improvements are not evenly distributed. The wealthy live longer, healthier lives. The poor still struggle. The tenements still overflow. The factories still poison. Progress is real, but it's uneven, and for many, it comes too late. As the century draws to a close and Queen Victoria's long reign ends, the world is changing. Electric lights are replacing gas lamps. Motor cars are beginning to replace horse-drawn carriages. The first vaccines are being developed. The modern age is dawning, and with it, a new understanding of health, hygiene, and the human body. But the Victorian legacy remains. The sewers built by Bazalgette still function. The public health laws passed in the 1800s still form the basis of modern regulations. The emphasis on cleanliness, on personal hygiene as a moral and social duty, that's still with us, though we understand now that it's not about morality, it's about microbes. Looking back at Victorian hygiene is an exercise in both horror and admiration. Horror at the conditions people endured, the ignorance that allowed such suffering, the toxic substances they ingested and applied to their skin, the preventable deaths. And admiration for those who fought to change things, The reformers and engineers and doctors who saw the problems and worked to solve them, often against fierce resistance. The Victorians were not, as we sometimes imagine, simply dirty and ignorant. They were people navigating a world in transition, caught between old beliefs and new knowledge, trying to maintain dignity and health in circumstances that made both difficult. They washed when they could, with the resources they had. They tried to protect their children. They worked to improve their lives. And in the end, they left us a world that, while far from perfect, is cleaner, safer, healthier than the one they inherited. They laid the groundwork for the sanitation systems we rely on, the public health infrastructure we take for granted. They learned, slowly and painfully, the lessons of hygiene that now seem obvious. So when you wake tomorrow morning and walk to your bathroom, when you turn on the tap and hot water flows, when you reach for your soap and toothbrush and the products you use without a second thought, remember the Victorians. Remember the cold water in porcelain basins, the chamber pots and cesspits, the great stink and the cholera outbreaks, the lead in their cosmetics and the arsenic in their wallpaper. Remember that hygiene is not instinctive. It's learned. It's built, literally, brick by brick, sewer pipe by sewer pipe. It's the result of engineering and science and political will, of people who cared enough to fight for change, even when change was hard, expensive, and unpopular. The Victorian era was many things: industrious, innovative, often cruel, deeply unequal. But it was also the era that taught us, in the hardest way possible, that cleanliness is not next to godliness. It's next to survival. And sometimes that's enough. If you've enjoyed this journey through Victorian hygiene, or if it's helped you drift toward sleep, consider leaving a like and subscribing to the channel. Your support helps us continue exploring these quiet corners of history. And if you're still awake, drop a comment telling us where you're listening from and what era of history you'd like us to explore next. Until then, rest well. Dream of clean water and modern plumbing. And be grateful, deeply grateful, for soap.